Picture this. It's spring of 1970 and you're standing in an Oldsmobile showroom. The salesman is trying to get you interested in a Cutlass Supreme, but your eyes keep drifting to that Matador red coupe in the corner, the one with the black stripes, the one that seems to squat lower than everything else on the floor. That's the 442 W30, and if you knew what was good for you, you'd walk away. But you won't. Nobody did. 1970 was a watershed year for America, and not in ways most people wanted. The war in Vietnam was tearing the country apart. Kent State happened that May. The muscle car era, that glorious, unrestricted period when Detroit built anything it wanted, was about to slam into a wall of insurance rates, emissions regulations, and an oil crisis nobody saw coming. But for one brief, shining moment, General Motors decided to throw caution to the wind and build something genuinely outrageous. The Oldsmobile 442 had been around since 1964, originally named for its 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed transmission, and dual exhaust. By 1968, Oldsmobile had dropped the naming convention but kept the badge, and the car had evolved into a legitimate muscle car contender. But it was always the gentleman's hot rod, more sophisticated than a GTO, more refined than a Chevelle. That all changed with the W30 package. This wasn't a gentleman's anything. This was Oldsmobile's middle finger to everyone who thought they couldn't build a street fighter. Section 1. The context of battle. To understand what made the W30 special, you need to understand what Oldsmobile was up against. By 1970, the muscle car wars had reached a fever pitch. Chrysler had unleashed the 426 Hemi, an engine so powerful it was almost comical. Ford had the 429 Cobra Jet and Boss 429. Even Oldsmobile's sister division, Buick, had jumped in with the GSX Stage 1. Every manufacturer was in an arms race, and the finish line was marked by quarter-mile times and bragging rights at the local drive-in. The problem was that Oldsmobile had a reputation problem. Yes, they built the 455 cubic inch rocket engine, a torque monster that could pull stumps. But torque doesn't win drag races, at least not the kind of drag races people talked about. You needed horsepower, you needed revs, and you needed a willingness to sacrifice reliability on the altar of performance. Oldsmobile's engines were smooth, sophisticated, durable. They were doctor motors, lawyer motors. They weren't street racer motors. Or so everyone thought. The W30 package, which had been introduced in 1966 as a special order option, proved that Oldsmobile's engineers knew exactly how to build a weapon. They just needed permission to do it. And in 1970, with insurance companies starting to price young men out of muscle cars entirely, Oldsmobile figured they might as well go out with a bang. The base 442 was already a strong performer, with its 400 cubic inch V8 making 365 horsepower. But the W30 took everything several steps further. This wasn't just a hotter cam and better exhaust. This was a top-to-bottom rethinking of what an Oldsmobile V8 could do. Section 2. The heart of the beast. Under that fiberglass ram air hood, and yes, it was functional, pulling cold air directly into the carburetor sat 455 cubic inches of angry Oldsmobile iron. The advertised rating was 370 horsepower at 5,400 RPM, with 500 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM. Those numbers were lies, of course. They were lies because GM's internal edict limited advertised horsepower to 370 for insurance purposes, and they were lies because nobody who drove one believed for a second that only 370 horses lived under that hood. Contemporary road tests suggested the real number was closer to 430 or 440 horsepower. Motor Trend tested a W30 automatic in their September 1970 issue and ran 13.29 seconds at 106.8 miles per hour in the quarter mile. That was Hemi territory. That was Boss 429 territory. And it was being done by a car that most people associated with your dad's 98. The engine's secret was in the details. Oldsmobile fitted a hotter camshaft with longer duration and more lift. They installed high-compression cylinder heads, 10.5:1 compression ratio, with larger valves and improved ports. The intake manifold was a special aluminum unit designed specifically for the W30, feeding a Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor. The exhaust manifolds were cast iron, but they flowed better than most aftermarket headers of the period. Then there was the ram air system itself. Unlike some manufacturers who treated ram air as a cosmetic exercise, Oldsmobile's setup actually worked. The twin scoops on the hood fed directly into a sealed air cleaner assembly, creating a genuine cold air induction system. At speed, this created a mild supercharging effect that added several horsepower at the top end. More importantly, it kept intake temperatures down, which prevented detonation and allowed the engine to run more aggressive timing. The bottom end was fortified to handle the abuse. Oldsmobile used a forged steel crankshaft, heavy-duty connecting rods, and forged aluminum pistons. The oil system featured a high-volume pump and windage tray to prevent oil starvation during hard cornering or acceleration. This wasn't a motor that would grenade itself the first time you buried the throttle. Section 3. The Transmission Wars. Here's where things got interesting, and where Oldsmobile made a decision that purists still argue about. The W30 package was available with 2 transmissions, a close-ratio Muncie M21 4-speed manual or a turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic. If you wanted to be taken seriously at the drag strip, you ordered the 4-speed. If you wanted to actually win at the drag strip, you ordered the automatic. The turbo-hydromatic was, without question, one of the finest automatic transmissions ever bolted to an American Vate. It was strong, it shifted quickly, and most importantly, it was consistent. With the 4-speed, your quarter-mile time depended entirely on your ability to speed shift without missing gears or over-revving. With the automatic, you simply mashed the throttle and steered. The car did the rest. Oldsmobile knew this, which is why roughly 60% of W30 cars were built with automatics. The enthusiast press howled about it. Real muscle cars had 3 pedals, they said. But the guys who were actually racing these cars on weekends knew better. An automatic W30 could run consistent 13s all day long. A 4-speed W30 might run a 12.98 on a good pass, or it might run a 14 flat when the driver got too enthusiastic with the clutch. The 4-speed cars did have one advantage. They came standard with a 3.42 rear axle ratio, compared to the 3.23 gears in most automatics. This gave them slightly better off-the-line punch, though the difference was minimal. Both versions could be ordered with an optional 3.91 or even 4.33 posi traction rear end for serious drag racing duty. Those highway gears meant the engine was screaming at 70 miles per hour, but it also meant you could rip through first gear in about 1.5 seconds. Section 4. Stopping the unstoppable. The 442 W30 came standard with power front disc brakes and rear drums, which sounds inadequate until you remember that most muscle cars of the era were still running 4-wheel drums. The discs were 11-inch diameter units with single-piston calipers, not particularly impressive by modern standards, but a significant improvement over contemporary alternatives. The real handling story was in the suspension. The W30 package included heavy-duty springs, stiffer shocks, and a larger front sway bar. The result was a car that could actually go around corners without wallowing like a waterbed. No, it wasn't a Corvette. It wasn't even a Trans Am. But it was far more competent than it had any right to be given its curb weight of just over 3,700 pounds. Oldsmobile fitted Polyglass F 6014 white letter tyres on 14-inch, rally wheels 7 inches wide up front, 7 inches in back. These were the fattest tyres you could get on a GMA body without modifying the wheel wells, and they still weren't quite enough to handle all that torque. Most W30 owners became intimately familiar with the sight of their own tyre smoke. Section 5. The reality on the street. So, what was it actually like to drive one? If you ordered your W30 with the automatic and 3.23 gears, It was surprisingly docile around town. The engine pulled cleanly from idle, the transmission shifted smoothly, and you could almost convince yourself you were driving a normal Cutlass, right up until you put your foot in it. Then the secondaries on the Quadrajet would snap open, the ram air hood would start pulling in great gulps of air, and that massive 455 would wake up like a sleeping grizzly. The car would hunker down on its rear suspension, the front end would get light, and you'd be doing 60 before you had time to think about what was happening. Car and Driver tested a 4-speed W30 in their June 1970 issue and recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.7 seconds. That was supercar performance. That was Ferrari territory. And you could order it from your local Oldsmobile dealer for less than $4,000. The quarter-mile numbers ranged from 13 flat to 13.5, depending on gearing, driver skill, and how well the carburetor was tuned. The automatics were consistently quicker than the 4 speeds in magazine testing, though this wounded the pride of manual transmission advocates. A well-driven 4-speed car with the 4.33 gears could dip into the 12s, but you needed drag slicks and considerable skill to get there. High-speed stability was surprisingly good for a muscle car of this era. The long hood and relatively short rear deck created decent aerodynamics, and the heavy engine up front kept the car planted at triple-digit speeds. Not that Oldsmobile would have admitted their customers were doing such things, of course. The official line was that these were sporty touring cars for the discerning driver. The reality was that W30 owners were terrorizing every Hemi and Boss 429 they could find. Section 6. Production, Numbers, and Rarity. Here's where the story gets interesting from a collector's standpoint. Oldsmobile built a total of 3,196 442 W30 models in 1970. Of those, approximately 2,440 were pillared coupes, the formal roofline model. Only 756 were built as hardtop coupes with the faster roofline. And if you wanted a convertible W30, Oldsmobile made exactly 264 of them. Those numbers sound reasonably healthy until you remember that 1970 was the last year before everything changed. In 1971, compression ratios dropped, horsepower ratings fell, and the W30 became a shadow of its former self. The 1970 model represented the absolute peak of Oldsmobile muscle car production, and even then, only a tiny fraction of 442 buyers checked the W30 box. Why so few? The W30 package added $784 to the base price of a 442, which itself was already more expensive than a base Cutlass. You were looking at well over $4,000 out the door, a substantial sum when the average American was making less than $10,000 per year. Insurance was another killer. If you were under 25 and wanted to insure a W30, you were probably paying more annually for coverage than you paid for the car. The color options were typically Oldsmobile conservative, with a few bright spots. Matador Red, Sebring Yellow, and Rally Red were the attention-getters. Most buyers chose more subdued colors like Twilight Blue, Burnished Bronze, or Emerald Green. The classic combination was Sebring Yellow with black stripes and a black interior, though those are uncommon enough today that any yellow W30 commands a premium. Section 7. Legacy and Value. What's a 1970 W30 worth today? That depends entirely on condition, originality, and documentation. A numbers-matching 4-speed hardtop coupe in excellent condition can bring anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000 at auction. Convertibles command even more. A pristine W30 convertible with proper documentation sold at Meckham in 2023 for $145,000. The automatics, despite being faster, typically sell for 10 to 15% less than 4-speed cars. The enthusiast market still values 3 pedals over actual performance, even 50-plus years later. Pillared coupes, the formal roof cars, sell for about 20% less than hardtops, despite being virtually identical mechanically. The investment potential is solid but not spectacular. These cars have appreciated nicely over the past 2 decades, but they haven't seen the explosive growth of Hemi Mopars or L88 Corvettes. Part of this is simply name recognition. When someone says muscle car, they think Charger, GTO, Chevelle. They don't immediately think Oldsmobile. That's a shame, because on pure performance grounds, the W30 could run with anything Detroit built in 1970. The other factor limiting values is restoration costs. These cars are expensive to restore properly. NOS and reproduction parts are available, but they're not cheap. A complete rotisserie restoration can easily exceed the car's market value, which means many W30s are survivors rather than show queens. That's actually good news for buyers. Survivor cars with honest patina often represent better values than over-restored trailer queens. Section 8. The end of an era. 1970 marked the end of something. The Clean Air Act had been signed. Insurance companies were in full revolt against high-performance cars. The OPEC oil embargo was just 3 years away. The muscle car era was ending, whether Detroit wanted it to or not. Oldsmobile could see it coming. They'd already started development on the Cutlass Supreme with its small block engines and luxury pretensions. The 442 would continue through 1972, but the W30 became progressively more anemic each year. By 1972, the 455 was detuned to 270 horsepower gross rating, not even SAE net. It was a shadow of what it had been. But for 1 year, for 12 short months, Oldsmobile built a car that could credibly claim to be the fastest production automobile in America. Not the fastest GM car, not the fastest Oldsmobile. The fastest production car, period. Independent testing showed that properly geared W30s were running quarter miles in the low 13s, with trap speeds over 106 miles per hour. That was quicker than the Hemi, quicker than the LS6 Chevelle, quicker than the Boss 429 Mustang. The automotive press didn't quite know what to make of it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Oldsmobile built cars for doctors and lawyers. They built smooth, quiet, comfortable automobiles. They didn't build drag-strip terrors that could yank the front wheels off the ground if you had the 4.33 gears and knew how to drop the clutch. Except they did. Just this once, they really did. The 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30 represents something we'll never see again. A major manufacturer building a genuinely extreme performance car with no regard for practicality, fuel economy, or common sense. It was too powerful, too thirsty, too expensive to insure. It was absolutely perfect. If you owned one back in the day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling when the secondaries opened up, the way the car would squat and leap forward like something alive. The looks you got at stoplights, the fear in the eyes of Hemi owners who'd just learned that their King of the Hill bragging rights had expired. And if you didn't own one, well, now you know what you missed. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Did you own a W30? Race against one? Watch your buddy wrap one around a telephone pole? These cars have histories, and those histories deserve to be told before they're forgotten. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the muscle car era's hidden gems, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up if you learned something new. And share this with anyone who still believes that only Mopar built real muscle cars in 1970. Thanks for watching, and remember, they're only original once.